This is a picture of him at an event in which he was counseling young people, young adults, young people at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. He gave a lecture on kink one-on-one. This is what he said in the lecture. I actually have trouble when we transition from pup play to having sex. Sam explains. Like, no, I can't have you whimper like that when we're having sex because I don't want to mix that world. It's interesting because he doesn't have to come out of pup mode to have me F him. I personally have to bring him out of pup perception for me. But then I'm still treating him as a submissive to me. Want to get your closing words on what he just said and why parents should be concerned about what they're going to be taught in the indoctrination centers of America.
That's right. This stuff is being taught in what's called SOGI Sex Ed, Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. Let me make a plug for an organization that I'm with that will help equip parents with resources to address their school board and their principal and their teachers, by the way. Okay. It's called SOGI International Task Force, and I am the lead clinical professional on that. The website is SOGI123, because in Canada, it's based in Canada, but we're international. SOGI123taskforce.com. A tremendous resource for parents to begin to understand what is it that Sam Brinton is into. What did he just say? How do you unpack that? We do very methodically on that website, that resource. But that is so filled, that quote is so filled with dark, twisted deviance that parents need to understand that there's such predatorial stuff in there. It would take me hours to unpack that, honestly,
exactly.
In this sense. It is so filled with very dark and dangerous stuff. If you want to begin to understand that, what I would recommend is this. Go to SurvivorSupport.net under the Insights tab. There are two sub-tabs called Porn and Dark Deviance. That comes from my experiences working with men who have offended. We already know Sam is crossing lines so dramatically that for a second time in less than 4 months, already knowing he's on camera, why would he steal another suitcase filled with women's underwear? Because the further somebody goes into deviance, the more brazen they become. It's part of psychopathy. We'll go into some additional details of what psychopathy is. That's really not written down by Robert Hare from my own research. I'm going to share that with you so we can better understand the likes of Sam Brinton and others, including Bill Clinton and others. I'm not putting, they're different, but they're both just as hard-hearted.
So I'm Samuel Brinton, and I'm from Perry, Iowa. I grew up the son of Southern Baptist missionaries, and we were living on a mission base. So a lot of missionary families living together. And the way I like to say it is that sin entered the building. A playboy got onto the campus, and so of course all of the middle school boys my age, it was perfect because we'd been limited to like censored PBS for most of our lives. It was, heavenly. And I thought myself so righteous because it didn't affect me at all. I went up to my dad and I said, Dad, and of course telling on the others because I was so wonderful and it didn't hurt me. And telling them, I said, but it's really weird. I didn't get the same feelings. I said, I have those feelings when I think of Dale, my best friend. My dad just started punching. That was the first day that I was sent to the emergency room because I'd fallen down the stairs. I was sent to the emergency room about 6 more times for falling down the stairs or tripping on the sidewalk. I'm in this constant state of fear. My mom finally starts recognizing, you know what? Hitting him might not be working. So let's try therapy. And it started with the first few weeks. I had AIDS. I was the only gay person left in the world because the government found all the other gays and killed them as children. If they found me, they would kill me. It's the perfect way to keep a child or a teen from coming out. And we moved on to physical therapy. Physical therapy was my hands being tied down and blocks of ice being placed on my hands. Then pictures of men holding hands would be shown to me, so that way I would associate the concept of the pain of ice with a man touching me. It worked really, really, really well. My dad could barely even hug me anymore when I would scream out in pain. Then we went into heat. So coils would be wrapped around my hands, and you would be able to turn the heat on or off. So now if we had a picture of a guy and a girl hugging, it was no pain. If there was a picture of a guy and a guy hugging, we had physical pain. We then went into the month of hell. The month of hell consisted of tiny needles being stuck into my fingers, and then pictures of explicit acts between men would be shown, and I'd be electrocuted. At this point, I was completely done. God did not want me on this earth anymore. So we lived on a 3-story building. I told my sister goodbye, and I walked to the roof. So my mom finds me up on the roof, says, she will love me again if I will just change, because my sister had tattled on me. My mom's up there, she'll love me again if I'll just change, which is not the thing to say to a person standing on the edge of a building. At this point, I'm a logical person again, and it shines through. This is only 3 stories, and if I don't die, this is going to hurt worse than the others. So I run back into my mom's arms saying, you know what? I'm changed. It's done. It worked. Epiphany from God. The pain finally stopped.
The Biden administration loves to brag about its diverse slate of nominees. Your actual qualifications aren't really that important. It's more about how you look. But we thought Sam Brinton might be an exception. Sam, an MIT grad and an expert, quote unquote, in nuclear energy, started back in June as a deputy assistant secretary in the Department of Energy. But we quickly discovered that Sam, who goes by the they-them pronouns, might not be the right person for the job. According to a report, there were substantial irregularities during Sam's hiring process, and Sam's gender identity may have taken precedence over actual qualifications. Perhaps the Biden administration chose this former nominee for other reasons. Maybe they were impressed by Sam's lectures on kink, or their interest in pup play, whatever that is. Either way, it looks like Sam's not only unqualified, he might also be a criminal. Brinton was allegedly charged with felony theft last month. Biden's nuclear energy expert apparently stole a woman's luggage at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport on September 16th. And there's video. Took the luggage, took the tag right off the bag, and ran into an Uber, and then checked into a hotel. And when cops asked if he took the woman's bag, he said, "Not that I know of, but these look like my clothes," quote unquote. And we called Hennepin County, and they confirmed the person arrested matches Sam's first, middle, and last name. We have not independently confirmed this. We really hope Sam is not the same guy who Biden hired. We hope we're wrong. We hope it's a different guy with the same first, middle, and last name.
Sam Brinton, just a month ago, had been arrested for traveling to Minneapolis, having stolen a bag that belonged to a young woman on a flight from Washington, D.C. to Minneapolis, and he took $2,300 worth of clothing. Now, what he did with it, we are unaware. We can only presume after a conversation with one of the most esteemed men in the field of studying perversion and sex offenders, having spent more than a decade in the prison systems of Pennsylvania with exclusive access to review of pedophiles. We can only presume that Mr. Brinton used that material for his own sexual gratification. Tonight, we have with us again, and I'm very thankful for this because it's a very important matter. John Uhler stated that he was one step away from moving from sociopath to psychopath. Well, tonight we're going to find out if he crossed. I want to talk with John Uhler this particular evening. Thank you, sir, for being with us, for being a part of TECN, and for all that you do for all of the great people around the world.
Ken, it is great to be with you again. I wish we didn't have to.
I know.
We were guy 2 weeks ago or whatever, and it's actually one of the more recorded it on my channel just so we could also get additional airplay. The original version is on your Rumble, either Rumble page for TECN.TV, the leader in internet TV, or on mine. But boy, oh boy, the comments, people's eyes are opened. And I had mentioned, certainly on social media, that, and I think when we were together, that, you know what, this guy is he's on a roll. Now, little would we have known that here we back and found out last night, at least it came through over the news, that he stole a second suitcase from the Las Vegas, the Harry Reid. But anyways, the Las Vegas airport. You know, it's like John Murtha Airport out in Cambria County in Pennsylvania. These politicians, they get all these things.
I tell you, all you have to do is pass a bill giving people money and you will get an airport in your name.
There you go. Okay, but within 4 months, this guy has stolen 2 suitcases. So either, and this is the first thing to put out there, because in case folks don't know, I have a background both working with survivors and severely emotionally disturbed kids. I've been doing therapy for about 30 years, but 11 plus years in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections on psych staff doing sex offender treatment, headed up one of their high intensity standalone units, which is for sexually violent predators. I am currently a sex offender treatment provider, so I have close to about 30 guys that I'm working with. I'm certified in the hair psychopathy checklist, so I really understand this. I've done hundreds of risk assessments. I've done hundreds of parole evaluations, including the men that have offended sexually, the full continuum of sex offenders. And prior to being a sex offender, a guy was a pre-arrested sex offender. So sex offender is an actual designation, meaning he's been arrested for a sex offense. But I want people to think through the day before somebody is actually arrested and charged and convicted. So the day before, are they any different? No, the only difference is nobody knew. Nobody was catching on. There wasn't the proof. So the day before the arrest, the guy is still the same. Now, it's an actual designation. So as we talk about Sam Brinton, I will not call him a sex offender. I will not say he's a convicted sex offender. I will say this, that he is an extremely sexually deviant man who is now breaking the law. And in my estimation, as it's clear, he targeted a woman's suitcase, looked at her tag. This was at the Minneapolis St. Paul airport. Now, and here's another key. He didn't check any luggage in on that flight. And here's another thing as I work with guys. Here's one thing that's amazing when you're dealing with sociopaths, especially sophisticated sociopaths and then psychopaths. There's 2 kinds, bloody psychopath and white-collar psychopath. That's important to know. There's 2 different kinds of psychopaths. When we hear the term psychopath, if you're normal, you think of what I thought of initially, which is the Freddy Krueger, the slasher kind of thing. Okay, that makes up a very small minority of psychopaths. The majority of psychopaths are called white-collar psychopath. That phrase, that term, was coined by Dr. Robert Hare of the PCLR, the Hair Psychopathy Checklist. That is the gold standard of forensic assessments for psychopaths. I'm certified in that. Pennsylvania Department of Corrections flew Dr. Robert Hare out personally, and we went through a multiple-day training. I was part of a handful of individuals that were hand-selected. So I'm forensically certified in the PCLR. I assess psychopaths. What's also important to know is the Pennsylvania Sex Offender Assessment Board, SOAB, Sex Offender Assessment Board. Part of their assessment, and they are an adjunct mandated per policy to assess in Pennsylvania, to assess sex offenders when they're coming up for parole. In Pennsylvania, their sentencing structure is not based upon good time like California is. Each state kind of does things differently. Pennsylvania has what's called a minimum and a maximum date. When you reach your halfway point in your sentence, regardless of what that is, 2 to 4, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, when you reach that halfway point, then you are required and you're eligible for being reviewed by parole. If you have a violent sexual offense, that is what we all think in terms of a violent sexual offense. Plus, if you have an offense against a child, that is automatically designated as a violent offense. And therefore, every pedophile, every person has, every offender that has a victim who is a minor will be assessed by the not only the psych staff in prison, so that would be my role, but on top of it, they have to be evaluated by the SOAB board. The SOAB board, part of their role is in that assessment, they will utilize the PCLR, the hair psychopathy checklist. And the question is, why do they do that? Because you only use that on psychopaths. So the SOAB board in Pennsylvania has seen fit to designate every offender that has sexually violated a child as they're assessing them for psychopathy. Now, by degrees, what I would say is degrees of psychopathy. Now, not every single offender who offends a child will, and it really depends upon the evaluator.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to say that there's more psychopaths than we want to believe. And psychopath comes down to one of three things.
Now, I just want to make a note here, John, because that's a very important point that John's making, because the APA considers that there are very few psychopaths and very few sociopaths. There are very few that fit the Hare standard. And we're going to be talking about all this particular stuff throughout the course. But what you're saying is, from your exclusive research, that there are more than meets the eye. Am I correct?
You are correct. And actually, we'll talk about that. Yeah, Robert Hare, again, the godfather of psychopathy, as he's called, he makes the case that there's relatively few psychopaths in prison. I would say that he is wrong. Now, who am I compared to Robert Hare? Well, I'll tell you who. I worked in prison. Okay. And so Robert
this
Hare,
is why Dr. Reisman loved you.
Okay. And so the reality is this. Here is what anybody that studies psychopaths will agree upon. Here are the three key descriptors or characteristics of a psychopath. And then from there, you have additional facets. But here are the, you can boil it down to three issues, three dynamics. Okay. And in my estimation, it comes down to one, and the rest all stem from there. Issue of conscience. Okay. The best way to view psychopathy is on a scale of 1 to 10. But a psychopath has no conscience. And what I tell people is this. It's not nature. That would be genetic. Mm-hmm. It's not nurture. That would be upbringing or environment. It is not hardwiring. Now, there's a lot of research that shows brain differences, correct. And what have they found? They found if you run somebody who clearly has done heinous things, because there's only so much time in a day and so many resources. And so the research, and you can go online and simply do an online search. We used to call it a Google search. I don't like Google anymore. But anyways, right? Yep. Just go in and say, type in brain scans of psychopaths and then look at the images, and these are real. And what you will see is the brain of a psychopath is very different. That's fact. Okay. Once a brain is changed into a psychopath, there's no coming back. That's fact. That's Romans chapter 1. We call that a reprobate mind. Yeah. It's no longer good for its intended purpose. So a psychopath can never not be a psychopath anymore. And I'll tell you why, especially from a Christian perspective. We get uncomfortable as Christians saying, well, it's gone beyond God's reach. Mm-hmm. Okay. What I would say is this: God let him go.
There you go.
In what way? He gave him over. That term is the judge handing somebody over to the officer to take him away. It's a judgment. It's a judgment in what way? God releases that person to really do and be what they want to be. And you can reach a point where your conscience no longer works anymore. And at that point, the person never wants to look back. They never want to turn around because they lose the desire and the want to be any other way than they are. So a psychopath is a psychopath because a psychopath has no interest in ever being any other way than they are. So they're never going to turn around. They have no value. I mean, it has no value for them. One of the funny little pejorative terms that some of these inmates would use with me is this. It's you're such you're such a Boy Scout. Right? That's a pejorative thing. And now they don't know the Scout law, but the most common thing that an inmate will complain about is his cellie. They hate it. Right? Why? Because the guy's messing with the stuff, he's stealing stuff. And so when I would hear that, I said, I know. Can you imagine, Mr. Jones, you just called me a Boy Scout, but you were just complaining about your cellie. I said, now let me see. Can you imagine if the thing that you think is so distasteful, a Boy Scout, can you imagine having a cellie that would be trustworthy? I hate that. Loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. I would hate to have a cellie like that.
It's going straight
that would
to
be
hell.
A Boy Scout.
That's going
That would
straight
be a
to
Boy
hell.
Scout. Okay. So a Boy Scout, the idea of being genuine, as a matter of fact, to the really profound psychopaths, and one of the things I would do is we would do moral dilemmas. And that's really the only way to assess degrees of psychopathy. Kohlberg created moral dilemmas, and one of those goes like this. You walk down the street and you find a wallet filled with cash, identification, and credit cards. What do you do? And I tell the guys in my groups, said, now don't say anything, but each of you had a visceral response and you know what you would do. Based upon that, there are categories, and just like the chart now in front of us, that will match this. Based upon moral reasoning, and you can get to a point where you have disdain for the good, and you actually hate it. And so one of the guys actually said, Mr. Uhler, I tell you what, I know what you do, and I hate you for it. I want to shoot you in the head for that. I said, what? He was being polite, right? He says, I know what you would do. And I said, well, what would I do if I walked down the street, found a wallet, identification, credit cards, cash? He says, I know what you would do. You'd give it back. You'd find the owner and give it back. I said, I hope I would do that. He says, well, that just bugs me. He says, so that's why I'd have to shoot you in the head and take the wallet. I said, well, I appreciate that. You're one of the only honest people in this group. Okay, why was he driven to say that? Because it's a visceral response where he hates somebody that would do what is right, just, and fair. He hates that. Why? Because he is a psychopath. And the ultimate end of that continuum is a disdain for the good and a desire to mar innocence and that which is good and pure. You become driven. It's Proverbs chapter 6. You start to be motivated by that which is going to defile and mar and scar. And that's before you got into sexuality. So a psychopath is someone that is driven to have a lasting impact in a negative way upon the victim. You can have a financial psychopath where they are going to take someone to the cleaners. And they feel obligated if somebody's dumb enough, so they will say in their heart of hearts, if someone's stupid enough to believe them and give them their wallet, how could they not? Then if the person ever decides to want their money back, now the psychopath is going to inflict pain. Because the difference, by the way, a sociopath and psychopath, and even a narcissist, the best way to view it is on a continuum. We tend to want to believe that, and first of all, predators know us better than we know them. A psychopath is a predator. They're driven to prey upon someone, and it's by degree. And the best way to view this is on a continuum going downhill once you get off the straight and narrow. The further you go downhill, and if anybody watches Journey to Healing, right, they're very familiar with my picture, the downhill progression from 1 to 10 and then into the minus numbers from -1 to -10. Psychopathy is in the minus numbers starting at probably about -5 or -6. Sociopathy, so it first starts with narcissism. We think a narcissist has low self-esteem. He doesn't. Okay. A simple narcissist needs a mirror and is very dramatic. But they're not going to get very far, right? Because people get irritated with them. They had enough. If you're a smart and sophisticated narcissist, you're never going to let people know it. Why? Because you're on your way to morphing into a sociopath. A sociopath is all about sales because you want what the other person has. You feel entitled. That's why you have a really big self-esteem. It's warped. It ain't right. But you feel you have the right to help yourself to somebody else's stuff or items or body. You're crossing boundaries. That's a pretty good self-esteem. Satan, by the way, has a great self-esteem.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's what I want to... Well, before we hit to
he
the
believes
next,
he should be sitting on God's throne. That's a pretty good self-esteem.
Yeah, you gotta have kahungas to believe that.
Right. And he starts saying, I will rise above it. That's gutsy when you tell God, move out of the way. I'm sitting down. That's pretty good self-esteem there. Whacked out, but nothing wrong with that self-esteem.
Exactly. Yeah. So I want to hit on some points here for those who will follow along tonight, because they are taking notes and they need to understand this particular process while we're picking on Mr. Brinton, because that's all that we're doing as evil people from the right. We're just picking on people because of what they do in their bedroom. That's all that we do. That's all that we care about. And so we're not. When it comes to the definition, according to APA, of psychopathy or psychopathy, it is a psychological condition characterized by antisocial behavior. And we're going to ask you about that. Antisocial behavior that includes the lack of remorse, empathy, in being bold. Sociopathy refers to a pattern of antisocial behaviors and attitudes, including manipulation, deceit, aggression, and a lack of empathy for others. Normally, these are the general managers for your company. Sociopathy is a non-diagnostic term, and it is not synonymous with psychopathy. Sociopaths may or may not break the law. I found that interesting when you compare it to psychopaths, because psychopaths would break the law. Can you tell us what the difference is based on the fact of antisocial behaviors?
Sure, and I'll preface this by saying I haven't published anything yet. So a lot of people will be quick to dismiss. Those that want to actually rationalize and justify sexual deviance will say this: we don't need to listen to this guy. He hasn't published anything. Well, what I would say is I have 2 websites, and I've written a fair bit about this. At some point in time, when I have the time, I will publish. Yes, I will. Okay, so I recommend that you go to 2 sites where I have a lot of material on there. Actually, three sites. The first is SurvivorSupport.net under the Insights tab, and I'm going to direct you somewhere in a moment. But we have 3 sites: SurvivorSupport.net, ChurchProtect.org, and again, there's no space between these compound words. So SurvivorSupport.net, ChurchProtect.org, and then I have a blog, SurvivorSupport.us. So the majority of my research information is on ChurchProtect.org. That's my training site. I recommend you start with the Myths tab, and you're going to find what I've written about the myths that are in the literature that comes from. You can say, well, how, John, you haven't published anything. These guys are academic. Okay, let's take that for a second, because that's valid. An academic researcher is someone who works where?
In school.
Sitting in an office. Where?
Yeah.
Okay, in college, in a school. Okay, where he went through undergrad and then he went on for master's. Okay. Where has he worked during that time? Probably part-time or something, but he's gone to school full-time, let's say, and then he's gone on for a PhD. Oftentimes, somebody goes on for undergrad, then master's, and then PhD. So we're going to put that maybe at the age of 25 to 27, 28-ish. Okay. Yeah. Where have they worked by that time? But they published what?
University. There
we go.
Done the right.
So they've worked in a setting that's air-conditioned. It's kind of like this. They've worked like where I'm sitting. And they've published about what? I'm not, hold on. I'm not going to take anything away from anybody, but they sit and they're typing their findings where? Okay. In sort of an office like this. Exactly. Their findings from what? So let's say they've published about psychopathy or sex offenders. Where did they do their research? Well,
in the library.
They were okay, or no. Let's say it's definitive. Let's say it's groundbreaking. It's straight from the mouths of the source, right? Direct source. Okay. How did they have direct source? Because they work where? In an office that looks like what? So they have to talk to them in prison. Correct. Okay. And they're going to interview them. Correct. I'm not minimizing any of this. This is a reality. So if I'm an academic researcher and I work in my office that looks like this, what do I have to do? I have to go where the psychopaths are. Because where else are you going to find them? Walk down the street? Are you a psychopath? I'd like to interview you. Okay. Yeah, right? And by the way, psychopaths don't believe they're psychopaths. They will say at best they're sociopaths. Little trivia, by the way. Okay, a psychopath. I post on Quora. I've done a fair bit of writing on Quora. I tell people this. If anybody says they're a psychopath, there are a lot of folks on, they're sort of funny. They're narcissists, but they're not psychopaths, because the reality is a psychopath doesn't believe he's a psychopath. And here's another piece to this. They're not interested in the discussion of psychopathy. It has no interest. They're just not interested. So a true psychopath will never spend time telling someone they're a psychopath because they don't have any tolerance for the subject, quite frankly. Yeah. So a little trivia. Okay, so if I'm going to do research, if I'm an academic researcher, I'm going to go where the psychopaths are, where I know they're psychopaths. How do I know? I've got one of two options. Brain scans. Well, what, I hold up a little, like a thermography gun, and okay, right? How are you going to identify a psychopath? If you have a family like mine, okay. But just shy of that, how are you going to find out?
You started my family. There you go.
Right? We're going to match it basically, right? The film that I showed on my program, they're all whacked out, but they're a bunch of, okay. So what you're going to do is this. You're going to go where it makes sense, where everybody agrees, okay, who you interviewed, that's a psychopath. So where is that person? He's going to be in prison. And you're going to base it upon offense where everybody agrees, yep, he interviewed a psychopath. How do we know? Did we scan the brain? Probably not at first. We're going to look at the criminal offense. He stuck a pitchfork in the hay and had his brother jump off. That's one of those that Robert Hare references. We go, yep, okay, that's Charles Manson. Yep, that's a psychopath. Ted Bundy. Yep, that's a psychopath. Okay. That's how it's done. So I'm going to go and where they are. Where are they? They are going to be where I can identify based upon behaviors and offense. Well, the only time you're going to know is finally when they're busted. Ted Bundy never showed what he was like except to the women that he executed. So you have to go where everybody would agree you interviewed a psychopath. Where's that? It's in prison. Well, can you just waltz in? If you're an academic researcher, can you just waltz in? I'll keep this short now. Can you waltz in and grab anybody and say, you're him, I want to interview? No, there's a very lengthy process, permission, all that. Then you either have to identify the one, such as Ted Bundy, I want to interview him, or could you, Mr. and Mrs. DOC, round up a few psychopaths for me? Plus, they have to behave themselves. They can't be in solitary confinement, or I could never interview them. Per policy, they can't be brought out of the hole. So I'm going to be able to gather up about how many of these individuals 3, 4, 5, 6. How many? Just a couple. I'm going to interview them where? I'm going to interview them in a room where either a corrections officer or a speaker system is. What are they going to do? They're going to record the entire conversation. Plus, I'm interviewing the guy. Okay, so I'm now interacting with the world's greatest liar, and I'm asking him questions. And I'm going to take that back, and I'm going to type it up, and I'm going to quote him. And now, if it's a sexual psychopath, what I'm going to ask is this: what do you think caused you to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually going to believe what he says.
Of course.
Because he's telling me. But this is the same guy that told everybody that they could trust him.
Mm-hmm.
Sam Brinton, when you played that video, that was the very first time he was talking about dad beat him and the suicidality. He was on the roof. And he looked so sincere. And my question to anybody watching that is, how do we know that any of that is true? And we say, well, nobody would lie. Oh, I'm sorry. So the guy who has stolen what? How many times? And when he was telling that story, was it the younger Sam Brinton or the older? The younger. So we would assume the older someone gets, the wiser, especially if they're promoted to a very prominent government position that takes the highest level security, dealing with spent nuclear waste. So the older Sam Brinton, who has a nice cushy job, who was handed this position, he, at his age, is stealing women's luggage, by the way, for their underwear. Uh-huh. How can you say that? Well, I flip it on you. You tell me it wasn't, because has he returned the underwear from the first bag? Well, no, where did it go? Well, I don't know. So now you're going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Give who? Somebody that steals women's luggage. What's in the luggage? Their personal items. What kind of personal items? Oh, the underwear. And this is the guy that lied to police. By the way, he should be already in jail for making false statements to the police. They're going after Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to give the benefit of the doubt to a guy that steals women's clothing, doesn't return it. He used that bag. He used the suitcase the next week. He kept it for a month. He used it the following week to go to his workshop where he's going to talk about kink.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is a very deviant individual who lied through his teeth. That's so brazen that he takes the woman's luggage that he stole and he's going to check it in to another flight. And he's carrying this thing around. And the police investigate. And they ask him, is that your bag? Not that I know of. Where have we heard that before? I don't know. It depends upon what that darn Hillary. I never had sex with that woman. Now, as far as psychopaths, my contention is this. There we go. By the way, that is a blog I wrote because there's very predictable things. Once you start to corner a psychopath, a white-collar psychopath, they will start to do very predictable things. They do a dance because they're going to try to throw you off the trail, and they're going to try to make sure they don't have boundaries put against them. So that blog post is found on SurvivorSupport.net. Okay. My contention is this. There are many more psychopaths than Dr. Robert Hare is giving credit to.
Exactly.
How do you know what a psychopath is? No conscience. And if you have no conscience, you're not sorry you do it. So there goes remorse, and you don't care about the impact. So it's no conscience, no remorse, and no empathy. That's
Can I
before.
take you back to
Yeah.
your program earlier tonight where you accused me of being a narcissist? And now I have to take
Nice.
my wife out to dinner.
Well, self-disclosure is good for the soul. So go ahead.
But the father, in that instance, showed all the signs of being psychopathic in terms of dealing with his son. And it seemed that everyone else around him had been groomed to accept it as commonality, a part of life, assuming that the abnormal is normal, which goes to the basis of this first hour. And we're going to go into a second hour talking about this, because what we're looking at is not just something that's happening to Sam Brinton, but it has been released upon the entire world by the alphabet mafia. This whole idea of making the abnormal normal, moving from sociopathy to psychopathy, and making people conform to the acceptance of the risk of all of that. If you could speak to that.
And we'll develop that more as far as the sexual psychopathy. It took this long, so my apologies for...
No, we got 2 hours with you, man. We got 2 hours.
Can I keep it? Okay. Oh, good. I'm sorry. I thought we were going to go to break. Okay, sorry. Okay. It's most important when talking about the subject, when we're talking about predators. Ultimately, that's what we're going to be talking about now. The question is Sam Brinton a predator? By degree, he already is.
Yes.
In what way? He's crossing boundaries and he's targeting things. Okay. And he's covering it up and he's lying about it. He's right. And here's something that's also very important with the men that I work with. Mm-hmm. The sophisticated perpetrator. Sam Brinton is a perpetrator. Now, I didn't say sexual perpetrator on somebody else. We're going to talk about that.
We're going to talk about that. That might be questionable.
Okay. But we do know this. When somebody crosses somebody else's boundaries and they're negatively impacting them, which is redundant. But when I cross lines, especially legal lines, I'm now perpetrating. Mm-hmm. He has broken the law. He is a perpetrator. We know that. That is established. Now the question is how much and in what way and to what extent, what else is he into? So we know he has a criminal mind. Mm-hmm. It's not impulsive. It's not impulsivity. And I'm going to talk about what needs to be qualified for the PCLR. Okay. Mm-hmm. The one thing that every sophisticated or bright narcissist, sociopath, and psychopath will do is they will try to make sure that you don't think they're as bright as they are. Mm-hmm. Okay? Because the one thing that we all want to assess in order to figure out intentionality, did the person really mean that, describing responsibility, is to what extent do they really get it? Right? This is, we assess the extent to which somebody is adequately oriented. Are they crazy or did they know what they were doing? Was it willful? Malice and forethought? Okay, to what extent does this person know and was there planning involved? Do they get it? Are they with it? Okay. Here's an easy answer with Sam Brinton, but I deal with the likes of the Sam Brintons because prior to being cherry-picked and given this wonderful job, he was working where? He was working for the Trevor Project, which people need to understand that's a very dangerous organization in this sense. Don't misquote me. I will tell you. Anytime you single out for phone calls a certain population among emotionally disturbed kids, you're now targeting a group. It should be a suicide prevention hotline. Why is it a hotline for gender confused kids? That should raise red flags. So we have a guy named Sam Brinton who was handpicked based upon his deviant lifestyle, quite frankly. Those are his qualifications. Now, MIT, but still. Never held a government job. Before you know it, he's assistant director of, assistant secretary of a federal government agency, like Department of Energy. My guess is he went to MIT because he went to MIT and he's pretty with it. He's pretty bright. See, I have enough respect for Sam Brinton, not as a person, but I'm going to acknowledge his IQ. I think we all should be able to acknowledge and admit Sam Brinton is probably pretty bright as far as IQ. He's morally depraved, but he's intellectually bright. So is Bill Clinton. So is Bill Gates. Right? They're horrible individuals. I'm convinced. Bill Gates is into genocide. Nothing. Hitler was probably very bright. So you can have very bright individuals that are heinous. Satan is very bright. Okay, so I'm going to give due, or I'm going to ascribe what is due to Sam Brinton, and I'm going to say he's intelligent. So I'm going to treat him as intelligent enough to go to MIT and to run a federal agency. Okay, so I have a bright man who somehow forgets he didn't check luggage in, and he wanders down to the luggage department, and he actually looks at a tag and rips it off, puts it in a pocket, and he takes it away, and he forgets, and cops eventually say, did you do that? Not that I know of. And then he returns it finally when he's busted, and there's no clothing. What happened to clothing? So a really bright guy that's brain dead.
Mm-hmm.
You don't. So that means he's lying through his teeth.
Oh.
So what I tell the guys that I work with is this. When they pull this, right? How many times have I heard these guys say something like, well, I didn't know that it was my wife. I didn't know it was my daughter who climbed into bed, and we were in a hotel, and I was a little disoriented. I'd been drinking and climbed in. How many times have I heard intellectually insulting things? And so what I tell the guys is this, as they're spinning this good yarn, rather than simply what? Saying, well, I did what I did because I wanted to do it. That's accepting responsibility.
But that would require that they have moral competence, that they had a conscience.
Or if they were smart, because they're going to get jammed up if they keep running their mouths like that. Because little by little, right? What I'm also measuring is how long, like when I worked in prison, are you going to make it through? First of all, are you going to make it through sex offender treatment, or I'm going to fail your rear end and you can try it again. You can sit and stew on that, right? Are you ready to accept responsibility? Here's something that's classic. And so you're seeing this with Sam Brinton. In sex offender treatment, I'm looking for some paper. Okay. So what we'd have, I have, let's say, his file. So I would come equipped with the guy's file.
Mm-hmm.
And when it was, especially the pedophiles were always painful, because a pedophile will never simply come out and acknowledge the truth.
Yeah.
Okay. So I say, in this case, I'm not going to say Brinton is a pedophile. Well, yeah, we don't know. But let's say I have somebody in my group and I say, okay, Mr. So-and-so, could you tell me, since I have your official police report right here, and victim impact, but this is what the police wrote up. Can you tell me what's on here? Pretty straightforward. Meaning, what do I got to find? I've read through it.
Yeah.
How many victims? How much pornography? How many films? How many do you think ever came out and just said it?
None.
0. 11 years. 11 years, and then even on parole. Okay. So if they can't even bring themselves, now they're the only category that won't. The other categories with adult victims sometimes will. But the pedophiles, those that have victims that are minors, never will.
Now, in that first video that we saw, John, where Sam Brinton is lying through his teeth, talking about he's going to jump off of a 3-story building, which is basically a house, and kill himself. He says that a playboy came into the community, and at that point our eyes were open, kind of like the Adam and Eve thing. Our eyes were open, and we then could see porn and other things, and we were able to see things that we would normally not be shown in a Christian environment. And then I told my father that I had a special love or relationship or feelings for my friend Dale. Now, I don't know if the playboy who came in was a young adult, but I would presume that that was the case. And I would think that he was admitting to the fact that he was molested. How often did you hear that story amongst the pedophiles?
And by the way, I don't think that Sam Brinton was molested. I don't even know if he's made that case.
Yeah.
The more sophisticated a guy is, the less likely it is that he was molested. Child-on-child offense, by the way, is a very real thing. Of course it is. I'm a therapist. Okay, but true survivors become protective, not exploitive. You look on social media and you will see there's something very common among the social media pages of survivors. They're going to have everything from mental health kind of memes to there's a sober seriousness. There's a struggle. There's memes about, encouragement that I can do it going through the storm. That's a survivor's social media page. It's not, I've got furries on there. I've got deviant stuff on there. I'm making jokes about, no, that's not a survey. I have cartoons on there. I have Lego land pictures. These are all pedophile red flags, by the way. Okay. You look at a survivor's page and you will see it. Survivors don't joke about that stuff. Why? Because they're still working through it. And after they've worked through it, they want to help others through it. It changes the course of their lives. So survivors are protective, not exploitive. It'll be something very different. For child on child, it is not plausible to believe that someone can make it into adulthood if they've been molested, that their behavior will not show it. What we're being asked to believe by sophisticated pedophiles, what I'm calling sophisticated pedophiles, who have no behavioral issues, and this now will speak to the issue of psychopaths. If someone has been molested as a kid, you're going to see there's a paper trail. There's a paper trail with teachers, with social services, with juvenile justice. What I tell people is this: if you want to do research on molestation on kids who are now in the justice system, you don't go to the sex offender unit. You go to the drug and alcohol unit. If you have, because they're numbing their pain. As a matter of fact, those are the guys that want to kill the pedophiles. Because there are no secrets in jail, and the true men that have been through stuff aren't snookered by this myth of minor attracted adults. They don't buy it. That's why they want to beat the tar out of it. Now, you don't have judgmental stuff going on in prison, but why is it that one category is going to bring the wrath down upon someone? Because all the inmates know how you become a pedophile, and how you become a pedophile is you saturate your mind in deviance. Deviance has a stair-step-like fashion downward. Once porn and the internet came along, it supercharged the process. And with Mr. Sam Brinton, what I would ask is this: I don't know his age, but when he was talking about that and when he was young, I don't know what his age is, and so was the internet around? Ever since the internet was around, don't tell me you found a Playboy. You're looking at stuff online. When Sam Brinton was running his mouth like that, now, do I know definitively that he's lying? No, but you don't know definitively if he's telling the truth. There's no evidence. There's no film. Where's the doctor's report? This kid was beaten up. This kid was pulverized by his dad. Where are the doctor's report of injuries? Right? I had these sophisticated pedophiles that would tell me that they were depressed and they sought out mental health treatment for years. And I said, really? I said, so can you sign a release and I'll get those? Well, there's no records. Well, there's no, I was depressed and I saw people, but there's no records. Well, it's been a long time. I don't know. Really? Okay. So you can't provide any proof, corroborating evidence of what you're telling me, but you want me to base my perspective of you to garner sympathy, to say that really what was happening is you were driven to reenact your own abuse at the age of the victim that you chose. You want me to believe that because that's in the literature and you know enough, you know that's in the literature, but you can't produce a shred of evidence to tell me that your story is true. Yet the one thing we do know about your character is this: you're the greatest liar in the world. And if you hadn't been busted, you'd still be lying and still be harming people. Yet now you want me to take you at face value like people took you at face value for years. Why is it that I should believe you're truthful now when before you lived a lie of deception? How do we know that Sam Brinton is a deceiver? Because he's now going to be arrested for his second theft. He has zero credibility. He's a criminal. Do not tell me that we're going to listen to a criminal who is extremely deviant and listen to his story and take it at face value. Are you that naive? He's a bright man. No bright man walks into and even says the story and is dumb enough to tell the police a false statement and then come back later on and say, well, I got, hemming and hawing. Okay, he made a false statement to a police officer. He should be in jail right now. Okay, exactly. But he's not. He's been given special privilege. I want to know why he's been given special privilege when he's deviant, and now we know he's a criminal.
Sam Brinton.
There you go, Sam Brinton. Now,
Sam Brinton is a drag queen counselor to kids.
And that's a huge issue, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. First non-binary gay drag queen to build.
Okay, now, by the way, pup play is, anybody into pup play, I can tell you this. They've already accessed and watched bestiality.
Exactly. Sam
you need
Brinton,
to understand.
He was at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, and he did a lecture on kink 101. Mm-hmm. And this is what he said as part of the lecture. I actually have trouble when we transition from pup play to having sex. So that's bestiality, am I correct? Or is that
there you go.
That's
and
a deviance?
You know what? And what is he even talking about there? I don't believe he has trouble at all, other than he wants to bring about more harm. By the way, bestiality is one step away from child rape porn.
Thank you.
But it's true. Okay. And this is one thing I never would have known this, and people are saying, how can you say this? Well, let me ask you, for those of you in our audience right now that are recoiling, Uhler's never published anything. Okay. So you feel a little energetic about this. Yeah. How can you suggest that? Okay. Let me ask you, calm down. Where have you worked? Where have you? Yeah, but you haven't published. Oh, slow down. You have a lot of energy. Okay. What line of work are you in? Well, what does that matter? Well, you want to debate. Well, what do you know? Okay, there. Where have you worked? Okay. Do you know where I've worked? I can tell you again. I was granted the research and clinical combined status when they had it. Now they just have the one. Okay. But it was very rare, relatively rare in ATSA, the Association of Treatment for Sexual Abusers. You had to have about 3,000 clinical contact hours, and it had to go before the board. That's their normal. Okay. Mine was fast-tracked in a way. I don't want to say why did I get it in a very short amount of time? Because I had over 12,000 clinical contact hours. I'm the first psychology staff member in the U.S. or Canada to have started a specialized treatment program in long-term solitary confinement. Through that, accrued, listen to this, I've accrued more clinical contact hours, meaning I've been working in psychology, in long-term solitary confinement with Hannibal Lecters and rapists, pillagers, all those kind of guys, hacked up bodies, okay? The worst of the worst, the state of Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. I have more clinical contact hours than any single prison psychology staff member, meaning I hold the record, than anybody in the US or Canada. I just haven't published, but I hold the record. Meaning I've spent more time with the Hannibal Lecters than anybody around. Okay. And I headed up one of the 65-bed standalone units for sexually violent predators. I oversaw treatment. And then I've been doing sex offender treatment now approximately for about 14 years. I'm a certified sex offender treatment specialist and provider. And for those of you that are all agitated saying, what did Uhler know? I will simply ask this. Where have you worked and who have you worked with and what population? And if you were to come into a prison, tell me, or sex offender treatment group, what would you do? Because you don't know, because you have no background, but you're agitated and you're going to counter what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this: why don't you listen? So that ultimately you can help protect women and children. But no, what do you want to do? You want to defend your deviance because it's getting close to home. And I would say this: put down your porn, do some self-reflecting and listen to a guy that's worked with every kind of sex offender, including men that have hacked up body parts, hacked up prostitutes. I know how they get like that. But for you, it's conjecture. And you want to tell me, but you're not peer reviewed with a bunch of academic. I'm not minimizing that, but I didn't see any of them working with me for hours and hours.